Welcome to another Human Read audiobook by the United Marxist Pact Discord server, link below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, the organizational structure, and the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production through the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all these texts have to say about this. At the end, have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of it, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole in an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be the 1951 Proletarian Dictatorship and Class Party by the ICP. We have a pre-written textual analysis in terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comments if you prefer to read in the text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the contents of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself, for the sake of understanding the context and full contents of the piece. In addition, in the reading, I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. I do not write down things that are repetitious or I feel are completely inapplicable. So let's do a quick summary. This is a short piece in terms of what I pulled from it, but I believe it was also short, the actual reading. The party's program is structured to fulfill particular tasks required within bourgeois society. These include the development and distribution of theory, analysis of contemporary capitalism, and the class struggle focused towards the state and revolution. While doing so, it ensures the unity of the international vanguard elements that have shared correct doctrine, along with the persistence of historical theoretical continuity and maintaining of principles. Emergent from this understanding of the state and class struggle, along with what is necessary to carry them out, is the duty to prepare in advance for the struggle in all ways, including materially, socially via propaganda and agitation, and building mass basis and experience through action in all immediate struggles. The party's role in the insurrection is to lead the working class as its general staff, to destroy the military and administrative organs, whatever form they may take, democratic or fascist, of the bourgeois class state. And now I'll begin the full audiobook reading. This will explain the full text that is being summarized here in such a way that you'll be able to understand what and why it was extracted from. I hope you enjoy the full reading. Proletarian Dictatorship and Class Party, 1951, by the International Communist Party. Split into 8 sections, and let's get started immediately. Section 1. Every class struggle is a political struggle. Marx. A struggle which limits itself to obtaining a new distribution of economic gains is not yet a political struggle, because it is not directed against the social structure of the production relations. The disruption of the relations of production peculiar to a particular social epoch, the overthrow of the rule of a certain social class, is the result of a long and often fluctuating political struggle. The key to the struggle is the question of the state, the problem of, quote, who has power? Lenin. The struggle of the modern proletariat manifests and extends itself as a political struggle with the formation and the action of the class party. Specific features of this party are to be found in the following thesis. The complete development of the industrial capitalist system and of bourgeois power, which issued from liberal and democratic revolutions, not only does not historically exclude, but prepares and sharpens more and more the conflict of class interests and its development into civil war, into armed struggle. Section 2. The Communist Party, as defined by this historical foresight and by this program, accomplishes the following tasks as long as the bourgeoisie maintains power. A. It elaborates and propagates a theory of social development, of the economic laws which characterize the present social system of production relations, of class conflicts which arise from it, of the state and of the revolution. B. It assures the unity and historical persistence of the proletarian organization. Unity does not mean the material grouping of the working class and semi-working class strata, which, due to the very fact of the dominance of the exploiting class, are under the influence of discordant political leaderships and methods of action. It means instead the close international linking up of the vanguard elements who are fully oriented on the integral revolutionary line. Persistence means the continuous claim of the unbroken dialectical line connects the positions of critique and struggle adopted by the movement during the time course of a series of changing conditions. C. It prepares well in advance for the class mobilization and offensive by appropriately employing every possible means of propaganda, agitation, and action, in all particular struggles triggered off by immediate interests. This action culminates in the organization of the illegal and insurrectional apparatus for the conquest of power. When general conditions and the degree of organizational, political, and tactical solidity of the class party reach a point where the general struggle for power is unleashed, the party which has led the revolutionary class to victory through the social war leads it likewise in the fundamental task of breaking and demolishing all the military and administrative organs which compose the capitalist state. This demolition also strikes at the network of organs, whatever they may be, which allege to represent the various opinions or corporative interests through the intermediation of bodies of delegates. The bourgeois class state must be destroyed whether it presents itself as the mendacious interclasses expression of the majority of citizens, or as a more or less open dictatorship wielded by a government apparatus which pretends to fulfill a national, racial, or social popular mission. If this does not take place, the revolution will be crushed. I'll take this entire thing. This is a great thing. Should probably be split up into multiple things, but we'll see. All right, so the party develops theory and analysis of contemporary capitalism and the class struggle, ensures unity of international vanguard elements that are on the proper doctrine. It ensures historical persistence in terms of theoretical continuity and maintaining of principles. It prepares in advance for a final struggle in all ways, materially, propaganda, agitation, and action in immediate struggles. In the insurrection, the party leads the working class to destroy the military and administrative organs, whatever form they take, of the bourgeois class state. Back to the text. Section 3. In the historical stage which follows the dispersal of the apparatus of capitalist domination, the task of the political party of the working classes is vital as ever, because the class struggle, though dialectically inverted, continues. It's talking about the ability of the class party to reverse praxis. Communist theory in regard to the state and the revolution is characterized above all by the fact that it excludes all possibility of adapting the legislative and executive mechanism of the bourgeois state to the socialist transformation of the economy, the social democratic position, but equally excludes the possibility of achieving by means of brief, violent crisis, destruction of the state and a transformation of the traditional economic relation between the state defended up to the last moment, an anarchist position. It also denies the constitution of a new productive organization can be left to the spontaneous and scattered activity of groups of producers shop by shop or trade by trade, the trade unionist position. Any social class whose power has been overthrown, even if by means of terror, survives for a long time within the texture of the social organism. Far from abandoning its hopes of revenge, it seeks to politically reorganize itself and to reestablish its domination either in a violent or disguised way. It has turned from a ruling class into a defeated and dominated one, but has not instantly disappeared. The proletariat, which in its turn will disappear as a class alongside all other classes with the realization of communism, organizes itself as a ruling class. That's from the Communist Manifesto. In the first stage of the post-capitalist epoch. After the destruction of the old state, it represents the new proletarian state, that is, the dictatorship of the proletariat. The precondition for going beyond the capitalist system is the overthrow of bourgeois power and the destruction of its state. The condition for bringing about such a deep and radical social transformation is the creation of a new proletarian state apparatus, capable of using force and coercion just as all other historic states. The presence of such an apparatus does not characterize communist society, but instead characterizes the stage of its construction. Once this construction is secured, classes and class rule will no longer exist. But the essential organ of class rule is the state. The state can be nothing else. Therefore, communists do not advocate the proletarian state as a mystical creed, an absolute, or an ideal, but as a dialectical tool, a class weapon which will slowly wither away, Engels, through the very realization of its functions. This will take place gradually through a long process as a social organization is transformed from the system of coercion of men, as it has always been since the dawn of history, into a comprehensive, scientifically built network for the management of things and natural forces. So I'm going to put this in our reading for the Dictatorship of the Proletariat. As you all know, I have readings from the Communist Mode of Production according to Marx and Engels, and the Dictatorship of the Proletariat according to Marx and Engels. And I will also be branching out after Marx and Engels on those as well later. I'm collecting stuff that is pertinent now, of course. Continuing. Part 4. The role of the state with regard to social classes and collective organization shows fundamental differences if we compare the history of regimes that spring from bourgeois revolution. The situation after the victory of the proletariat. A. Revolutionary bourgeois ideology, prior to its struggle and final victory, presented its future post-feudal state not as a class state, but as the people's state, based on the abolition of every inequality before the law, which it presented to be sufficient to assure freedom and equality for all members of society. Proletarian theory openly asserts that its future state will be a class state, that is, a tool wielded by one class only, as long as classes exist. The other classes will be excluded from the state and outlawed in fact as well as in principle. The working class, having achieved power, quote, will share it with no one, end quote. Lenin. B. After bourgeois political victory, and in keeping with the tenacious ideological campaign, constitution charters or declaration of principles were solemnly proclaimed in the different countries as a basis and foundation of the state. They were considered as being immutable in time, a definitive expression of the last discovered imminent rules of social life. From then on, the entire interplay of political forces was supposed to take place within the inseparable framework of those statutes. During the struggle against the existing regime, the proletarian state is not presented as a stable and fixed realization of a set of rules governing the social relationships inferred from an idealistic research into the nature of men and society. Liberal theory, which presupposes a particular character of human beings. And therefore, essentially, their system simply needs all these short hot fixes at any given time because, this person abused the system, we're going to fix the system so that doesn't happen again. And the thought process of liberal ideology is essentially that there's a continual progression of history towards greater justice, as we just follow the liberal conception and rationalism and so on and so forth, which will eventually lead to the perfect system and society, as the various issues are hammered out through well-minded individual people who find themselves into leadership positions, which because through democracy and so on and so forth, of course, have the interests of the whole people in mind with whatever decisions that they make. Continuing. During its lifetime, the working class state will continually evolve to the point that it finally dissolves. The nature of social organization, of human association, will radically change according to the modifications of technology and forces of production, and man's nature will be equally subject to deep alterations, always moving more and more from the beast of burden and slave which he was. Anything such as a codified and permanent constitution to be proclaimed after the workers' revolution is nonsense. It has no place in the communist program. This is why I advocate for 5-year revolutionary plans, by the way. Not just an economic plan, but also a cultural and state plan. Because, of course, as your economy and society develop, your state is going to need to develop too. And ideally, that can be done in a coherent manner, which involves plans. Continuing. Technically, it will be convenient to adopt written rules, which, however, will in no way be intangible and will retain an, quote, instrumental and temporary character, putting aside all jests about social law, ethics, and natural law. C. Having conquered and even crushed the feudal apparatus of power, the victorious capitalist class did not hesitate to use the force of the state to repress the attempts of counter-revolution and restoration. However, the most resolute terrorist measures were justified as being directed not against the class enemies of capitalism, but against the traitors of the people, of the nation, of the country, and of civil society. All these hollow concepts being identified with the state itself and, as a matter of fact, with the government and the party in power. The victorious proletariat, by using its state in order to, quote, crush the unavoidable and desperate resistances of the bourgeoisie, Lenin, will strike at the old rulers and their last supporters every time they oppose in a logical defense of their class interests the measures intended to uproot economic privilege. These social elements will keep in a strange and passive position vis-a-vis the apparatus of power. Whenever they try to free themselves from the passivity imposed upon them, material forces will subdue them. They will share no, quote, social contract. They will have no, quote, legal or patriotic duty. As veritable social prisoners of war, as in fact were the four aristocrats and clergymen of the Jacobin bourgeoisie, they will have nothing to betray, because they will not be requested to take any ridiculous oath of allegiance. D. The historical glitter of the popular assemblies and democratic gatherings hardly disguise the fact that, at its birth, the bourgeois state formed armed bodies and a police force for the internal and external struggle against the old regime and quickly substituted the guillotine for the gallows. This executive apparatus was charged with the task of administering legal force both on the great historical level and against isolated violations of the rules of appropriation and exchange characteristic of the economy founded on private property. It acted in a perfectly natural manner against the first proletarian movement which threatened, even if only instinctively, the bourgeois form of production. The imposing reality of the new social dualism was hidden by the game of, quote, legislative apparatus which claimed to be able to bring about the participation of all citizens and all the opinions of the various parties in the state and in the management of the state with a perfect equilibrium and within an atmosphere of social peace. The proletarian state, as an open class dictatorship, will dispose of all distinctions between executive and legislative levels of power, both of which will be united in the same organs. The distinction between legislative and executive is, in effect, characteristic of a regime which conceals and protects the dictatorship of one class under an external cloak which is multi-class and multi-party. Quote, the commune was a working, not a parliamentary body. Marx. E. The bourgeois state in its classical form, in coherence with the individualist ideology which the theoretical fiction universally extends to all citizens, which is the mental reflection of the reality of an economy founded on the monopoly of private property by one class, refused to allow any intermediate body other than elective constitutional assemblies to exist between the isolated individual subject and the legal party center. Political clubs and parties that had been necessary during the insurrectional stage were tolerated by it by virtue of the demagogic assertion of free thought and on the condition that they exist as simple confessional groupings and electoral agencies. In a later stage, the reality of class repression forced the state to tolerate the association of economic interests, the trade unions, which it distrusted as a, quote, state within a state. Finally, unions became a form of class solidarity adopted by the capitalists themselves for their own class interests and aims. Moreover, under the pretext of legally recognizing the trade unions, the state undertook the task of absorbing and sterilizing them, thus depriving them of any autonomy so as to prevent the Revolutionary Party from taking their leadership. It is absolutely the case, right? the unions, by being made legal and under strictures, had any capacity for them to take revolutionary action just ripped right out of them, because what ended up happening is well, they get to legislate about it and say, hey, you should be part of a legal union, and if you aren't, then your leaders are going to get arrested, you won't get the legal protections, and so on and so forth. So everybody, joins a legal union because it's easier. It's so much easier to be in a legal union. It's just that these legal unions do things like say no unions cannot, in fact, pay money to public officials. No unions cannot, in fact, go on black cat strikes. They cannot have communists in positions of power, Taft-Hartley Act, and so on and so forth. They can't organize on inter-shop basis. You can only organize against your own personal capitalist. And in fact, the capitalist gets to decide who can be on the ballot for union leadership. So as soon as your first your first creation of the union is over, everything after that is yellow just by design. Continuing, trade unions will be present in the proletarian state as long as there still be employers or at least impersonal enterprises where workers remain wage earners paid in money. Their function will be to protect the standard of living of the working class, their action being parallel on this point to that of the party and the state. Non-working class unions will be forbidden. Actually, on the question of distribution of income between the working class and the non-proletarian or semi-proletarian classes, the workers' situation could be threatened by considerations other than the superior needs of the general revolutionary struggle against international communism, or capitalism, excuse me. But this impossibility, which will long subsist, justifies the Union's secondary role in relation to the political Communist Party, the international revolutionary vanguard, which forms a unitary whole, with the party struggling in the still capitalist countries and as such leads the proletarian state. The proletarian state can only be animated by a single party, and it would be senseless to require that this party organizes in its ranks a statistical majority and be supported by such a majority in, quote, popular elections. That old bourgeois trap. One of the historical possibilities is the existence of political parties composed in appearance by proletarians, but in reality influenced by counter-revolutionary traditions or by foreign capitalisms. This contradiction, the most dangerous of all, cannot be resolved through the recognition of formal rights, nor through the process of voting within the framework of an abstract, quote, class democracy. This too will be a crisis to be liquidated in terms of force relations. I do hope that they actually go into depth about that. I could explain, but I don't want to have to break out various texts on that. This is a summary, though. To note, when it's saying, essentially it's saying that the we'll see if it says anything about explaining itself. If not, while I'm presenting this in my notes, I will explain what what that's saying. Um, anyway, there's no statistical contrivance which can ensure a satisfactory revolutionary solution. This will depend solely on the degree of solidarity and clarity reached by the revolutionary communist movement throughout the world. A century ago in the West, 50 years ago in the Tsar's empire, now 100 years ago, Marxists rightly argued against simple-minded 70 years, Democrats that the capitalists and proprietors are minority, and therefore the only true government of the majority is a government of the working class. If the word democracy means power of the majority, the Democrats should stand on our class side. But this word, both in the literal sense, power of the people, as well as in the dirty use that is more and more being made of it, means power belonging not to one, but to all classes. For this historical reason, just as we reject bourgeois democracy and democracy in general, as Lenin also did, we must politically and theoretically exclude as contradiction terms class democracy and workers' democracy. Yeah, so I had plenty of criticisms of this, and as you probably are aware, I think that this is a profoundly myopic understanding of the contents of democracy, but I understand what they're saying and why. And I will explain elsewhere if people are interested. Continuing. The dictatorship advocated by Marxism openly claims to be necessary because it is impossible that it be unanimously accepted, and furthermore, it will not have the naivety to abdicate for lack of having a majority of votes, if such a thing were ascertainable. Then it will not run the risk of being confused with the dictatorship of men or groups of men who take control of the government and substitute themselves for the working class. Actually, no. That's quite the opposite. The revolution requires a dictatorship because it would be ridiculous to subordinate the revolution to a 100% acceptance or 51% majority. Wherever these figures are displayed, it means that the revolution has been betrayed. No. Continuing. In conclusion, the Communist Party will rule alone and will never give up power without a physical struggle. This bold declaration of not yielding to the deception of figures and not making use of them will aid in the struggle against revolutionary degeneration. Okay, bro. In the higher stage of communism, listen, there's a principle called no confidence. People can have no confidence, and that's a thing, and one should be cognizant of that. Now, does the bourgeois state abdicate because it doesn't get votes? I mean, usually, you any individual president in America gets something to the tune of maybe 20% of votes of people, right? Because it's the vast majority of people don't vote, and then after that, the votes are split amongst multiple parties. And not to mention, there's that previous period where the parties had their various candidates. So essentially, your pickings of candidates are reduced to one because it's first past the post structure. So realistically, the candidate in position in a bourgeois state is probably going to be supported by, at least of initial purposes, by simply less than 10% of the population, of the voting capable population, if we leave out, for example, children and teenagers, which maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. If we include those, of course, that's going to be 5% population, probably isn't important. And, that's, even if we're talking about in terms of, how would I say this, in terms of liberal democracy, right? That should be indicative, more or less, of a vote of no confidence. But that doesn't matter because, as any liberal will tell you, if you don't vote, then it doesn't matter what you have to say, right? You could absolutely devise a thing that says, in order to vote, you need to be a member of the Proletarian and member of the class party or something along those lines. That can absolutely be said. Um, and nobody would say anything about that because the class party after the revolution should be open to any proletarian to join. Because it's no longer a militant organization. Not really. It no longer needs to be enclosed and secretive or anything along those lines. So, again, I think that, as usual, these people have a profoundly myopic understanding of democracy, and they also have an incorrect understanding of liberal democracy, for that matter, in all the worst ways, because they see neither the ways that it approaches the people and deceives them, while at the same time, or at least an entire section of that, while at the same time they don't understand how that can be employed by a proletarian state to essentially, as a tactic. they perceive democracy as fundamentally a deceptive thing, but it's not. It's deceptive in its particular use. The fact that the people are engaging there, and yes, I fundamentally agree that democracy is impossible in a class society because it's the rule of the people. But when people are split into classes, there are some people whose interests are directly against those of other people, and therefore such a thing cannot lead to unity of any sort. It's a self-defeating thing. It's the democracy of one people to oppress and exploit another people. However, that does not mean that, this is outside of that. Anyway, I'm going to record this in our quotations for the Dictatorship of the Proletarian. Part 5. The Marxist conception that substituting parliamentary assemblies with working bodies does not lead us back into, quote, economic democracy, end quote, either, i.e., into a system which would adapt the state organs to workplaces, to productive or commercial units, etc., while excluding from any representative function the remaining employers and economic individuals still owning property. The elimination of the capitalist and the proprietor only defines half of socialism. The other half, the most significant one, consists of the elimination of capitalist economic anarchy, Marx. As the new socialist organization emerges and develops with the party and the revolutionary state in the foreground, it will not limit itself to striking only the former employers and their flunkies, but above all, it will redistribute the social tasks and responsibilities of individuals in a new and original way. Therefore, the network of enterprises and services such as they have been inherited from capitalism will not be taken as the basis of an apparatus of so-called quote-unquote sovereignty, that is, of the delegation of powers within the state and up to the level of its central bodies. It is precisely the presence of the single-class state and the solidly and qualitatively unitary and homogeneous party which offers the maximum of favorable conditions for reshaping of social machinery, which is to be driven as little as possible by the pressures of the limited interests of small groups, as much as possible by the general data and by their scientific study applied to the interests of collective welfare. The changes in the productive mechanism will be enormous. Let us only think of the program for reversing the relationships between town and country, on which Marx and Engels insisted so much, and which is the exact antithesis to present trends in all known countries. Therefore, the network modeled after the working place is an inadequate expression which repeats the old Proudhonist and Lassalle positions that Marxism had long ago rejected and surpassed. I'll put this in the Dictatorship of the Proletariat too. And this also responded to that question about manual labor. And I want to read what Rosalia said. Quote, while in communist society where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production, and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have in mind, without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. That's from the German ideology. So, what will your job be on the commune? The question hinge on the false assumption that you will have a job. You will, of course, work. All people will. And all people can come together and decide on work assignments. But no one will have a job because the capitalist division of labor has ended. And to think otherwise shows the limitations of present thinking about a future society. People cannot even imagine a future where jobs don't exist, so they see communism as a program for the reassignment of jobs. And then, for an example, O thou likest not feudalism? The knights of the king protect thy land, and are owned thy fealty in return. If thou hadst belonged to no fief, then who wouldst thou owe thy fealty? Shecke and mate, stupid little burgher. So, there's this thing where, if my position is, if an argument for a current mode of production was in the past inadequate to defend a past mode of production, you can't use it, right? Um, and I think that's a useful way of thinking about things. Um, if hierarchy, as an example, right? Like Jordan Peterson, if hierarchy is used as a defense of the current capitalist mode of production, then hierarchy can be used as a defense of the previous mode of production, feudalism, and before that, slave society as well. Therefore, any basis for arguing for that is automatically to be discarded because it's like, well, no, history is in motion. Therefore, anything that can protect one thing of history and another must necessarily be discarded. Only things that that hold no continuity in those regards, or rather are continuous, can be utilized, and nothing for reference. Nothing can be supported in those terms. Class society cannot be protected um, on those terms. Continuing. Section 6. The definition of the type of links between the organs of the class state and its base depends, first of all, upon the results of historical dialectics and cannot be deduced from, quote, eternal principles, from, quote, natural law, or from a sacred and inviolable constitutional charter. Any details of this regard would be a mere utopia. There is not a grain of utopianism in Marx, Engels stated. The very idea of the famous delegation of power by the isolated individual elector, thanks to the Platonic act emanating from his free opinion, must be left to the foggy realm of metaphysics. Opinions in actuality are but a reflection of material conditions and social forms, and power consists of the intervention of physical force. The negative characterization of workers' dictatorship is clearly defined. The bourgeois and semi-bourgeois will no longer have political rights. They will be prevented by force from gathering in groups of common interest or in associations for political agitation. They will never be allowed to publicly vote, elect, or delegate others to any post or function whatsoever. But even the relationship between the worker, a recognized and active member of the class in power, and the state apparatus will no longer retain that fictitious and deceitful characteristic of a delegation of power, of a representative through the intermediary of a deputy, election ticket, or by a party. Delegation means, in effect, a renunciation of the possibility to direct action. The pretended quote unquote sovereignty of the democratic right is but an abdication. In most cases, it is an abdication in the favor of a scoundrel. The working members of society will be regrouped into local territorial organs according to their place of residence and, in certain cases, according to the displacements imposed by their participation in a productive mechanism and full transformation. I don't know what exactly that means. Perhaps if they needed to move to work on a particular project, um, they might have. I'm not sure. Thanks to their uninterrupted and continuous action, the participation of active social elements in the mechanism of the state apparatus, and therefore in the management and exercise of class power, will be assured. To sketch these mechanisms is impossible before the class relationships from which they will spring have been concretely realized. I just agree with that. Certainly, you can't make any specifics, but you can absolutely sketch out mechanisms. I don't know what that's talking about. um, well, I'll just say you don't have a plan or you don't know. Anyway, this is an important question. If I'm going to say, okay, I want to know how it is exactly that I'm going to engage within my government. Uh, and they say, oh, we can't make any claims about mechanisms or anything like that. I'm gonna say, so you you don't know. You don't have any plans on me being able to engage. You're just saying that I will. I need something a little more structured and clear about how it is that my engagement is. I mean, democracy under bourgeois society says I get to engage in this way, but of course that's a lie. You're not making any positive claims. You're simply making negative claims about democracy while not while going in and saying that it will be different. Now explain how it will be different. Explain the mechanisms, explain the process, and so on and so forth. This needs to be solidified so people don't walk in and say, no, I'm not giving a. Are you sure I have nothing to lose with my chains? I might be losing a lot more than that. Under your system, if you can't convince me otherwise. Anyway, 7. The Paris Commune established as most important principles, see Marx, Engels, Lenin, that its members and officials would be subject to recall any time and that their salary would not exceed the wages of an average worker. Any separation between the producers on the periphery and the bureaucrats at the center is thus eliminated by means of systematic rotations. Civil service will cease being a career and even a profession. No doubt, when put into practice, these controls will create tremendous difficulties. But it was long ago that Lenin expressed his contempt for all plans of revolutions to be carried out without difficulties. The inevitable conflicts will not be completely resolved by drawing up piles of rules and regulations. They will constitute a historical and political problem and will express a real relationship of forces. The Bolshevik Revolution did not stop in front of the Constituent Assembly, but dispersed it. The workers, peasants, and soldiers' councils had risen. This type of new state organs, which burst forth in the blaze of social war, and were already present in the Revolution of 1905, extended from the village to the entire country through a network of different levels of territorial units. Their formation did not answer to any of the prejudices about the, quote, rights of man, or the, quote, universal, free, and direct and secret, end quote, suffrage. The Communist Party unleashes and wins the Civil War. It occupies the key positions in military and social sense, and multiplies its means of propaganda and agitation 1,000-fold through seizing buildings and publishing establishments. Without losing time and without procedural whims, establishes the, quote, armed bodies of workers, end quote, of which Lenin spoke, the Red Guard, the Revolutionary Police. At the Soviet meetings, it wins over a majority to the slogan, quote, all workers to the Soviets, all power, to the Soviets, end quote. Is this majority a merely legal event or a coldly and plainly numerical fact? Not at all. Should anyone, be he a spy or a well-intentioned but misled worker, vote for the Soviet to renounce or compromise the power conquered thanks to the blood of the proletarian fighters, he will be kicked out by his comrades' rifle butts. And no one will waste time with counting him in the, quote, legal minority. That criminal hypocrisy which a revolution can do without and which a counter-revolution can only feed upon. Again, adding this to the dictatorship of the proletariat. 8. Historical facts different from those of Russia in 1917, that is, the recent collapse of feudal despotism, a disastrous war, the role played out by opportunist leaders, could create, while remaining on the same fundamental line, different practical forms of the basis network of the state. From the time the proletarian movement left utopianism behind, it has found its way and assured its success, thanks not only to the real experience of the present mode of production and the structure of the present state, but also to the experience of the strategical mistakes of the proletarian revolution, both on the battleground of the, quote, hot Civil War, where the communards of 1871 gloriously fell, and on the, quote, cold one, which was lost between 1917 and 26. This last was the great battle of Russia between Lenin's international and world capitalism, supported on the front lines by the miserable complicity of all the opportunists. Communists have no codified constitutions to propose. They have a world of lies and constitutions, crystallized in the law and in the force of the dominant class to crush. They know that only a revolution and totalitarian apparatus of force of power, which excludes no means, will be able to prevent the infamous relics of barbarous epoch from rising again. Only it will be able to prevent the monster of social privilege, craving for revenge and servitude, from raising its head again and hurling for the thousandth time its deceitful cry for victory. And that is the text Proletarian Dictatorship and Class Party by the ICP. Now, in terms of the actual content for our reading currently, there's very little. This is more about the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that's perfectly fine. And to some degree, the role that the party places in it, or rather, the actions that the party will take, and its stance on democracy, and so on and so forth. In the worker organization that is in the process of taking power, however, it does make some claims about it, and it's been a useful reading thing. With that said, that is the end of this text, and I hope you have a wonderful day.